we're talking about game dev, and let's maybe talk about some other games that are played all across the globe.
Mhm.
Called let's call them pandemic games, or let's just take a rear view mirror and maybe try to sum up or review the impact of the last 2 years,
Mhm.
like on your life and maybe the industry and the way
Yeah.
that the digital artist today works.
Mhm.
Maybe let's also play in some future forecasts
Mhm.
if we can. And like it's already 2 years since the pandemic broke out. And how did that impact you and your work and life?
I mean, it's been a weird thing as well, where it's kind of been a blessing in disguise because we were so locked up and inside for so long. It definitely pushed me to learn more within 3D. But then one of the greatest things I've done over the last 2 years, even over the last year, was game jams. Like it's a weird thing that people talk about, within university settings and stuff. But even outside of that, I know people who are in the industry and will do it just as something fun to do for the weekend. But there was a really good setup organised by Colin McDonald and Brian Baglow and a couple other guys from the industry in Scotland, and they actually were some of the original guys at DMA Design who made the first Grand Theft Auto games in Dundee, Scotland. And now industry veterans running their own companies, but they set up this whole thing called Games Jobs Live, specifically for games within the games industry, or sorry, jobs in the games industry in the UK. And one of the first events they held was a game jam, and it was going to be held over a week, which is great because a lot of game jams are either 24 hours or 40 hours. And the way that they done it, it was a whole week. So you weren't doing the whole thing where like you have to stay up like 24 hours, or you weren't sleeping, and they wanted you to like work on something and go away from it, sleep, come back to it the next day. Um, so yeah, so we done. Actually, it was kind of last minute. I went in the Discord they were running at the time that Colin had set up, and I posted my portfolio really last minute. I wasn't even thinking about doing it, and then two artists from Ireland reached out to me, and they came from Waterford College, which is the same college that Danny O'Dwyer went to before going to GameSpot and No Clip and everything. And Sean and Adrian, I looked at my stuff and really loved it. And they talked about, they sold me the whole pitch of like they had won a bunch of game jams in the past and they had done really well, and they were just basically looking for an artist to beef up their core gaming skills and make the 3D stuff. So yeah, I got involved with them. We made a game in a week called Tomato Mare, which was a game about a tomato that lives through a kitchen nightmare and has to navigate like in his head like a nightmare where there's kitchen utensils and plates everything flying around, and you jump from utensil to utensil. And yeah, it won a bunch of awards, like almost 7 different awards in one go. It was one of the best games they had seen at the time. And yeah, a whole relationship with those guys was born. And then we reconvened back in March this year and done another game, The Calamity, which was just as good. Didn't win as many awards this time, I think, because we overreached a bit. But at the same time, it was one of the most intense things I had done 3D wise. And it was fun as well because that was one of the key cornerstones for Matt wanting to hire me, because he loved not only how quickly I could work, but the level of stuff I could make. And him seeing the final game was just like proof that I could make something for him on the same level. Um, so yeah, those game jams were instrumental in the pandemic. It was something to do during lockdown that really escalated my skills, core skills in Maya, and Substance and other things, and rendering and working in Unity for the first time and getting used to that game engine, and getting to learn a bit of game design. I even got to design some levels and some animations. So yeah, it was a bunch of stuff I'd done that was really awesome, and it just kept me going through that whole thing because obviously it was shit to be stuck inside all the time, and yeah, it was just a shit set of circumstances over the last couple of years, but I've tried to make the best of it, and the podcast obviously was putting out multiple episodes at one point every month, and I was trying to interview more and more people, and because I couldn't go to events. So, and I've been at, the last 5 years, I've really been, all my money has went to, going to events, and I saved for so long to go to Lightbox in LA in 2019. So yeah, the fact that I just couldn't go anywhere anymore, I tried to compensate by having a bigger online presence. So, but now post-pandemic, right? Or well, years later, there's so many people I know that are now embracing remote working fully. I mean, at Fabricated Madness, we have people on every corner of the globe almost, and we all work remotely. We all work from our homes. Matt's fully embracing the remote work thing because he's like, why do you need to have a brick and mortar place? It's something we want to do in the future. We talked about if we had a lot of money and investment and the game done really well, we would want to open not only a North American studio but also a European studio, which would probably be actually here in Scotland, where we could bring in the European talent to work here, probably in somewhere like Glasgow. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Maybe even in Falkirk, where I stay, like we could have people locally here working. So yeah, it's a thing for the future. But yeah, even one of the guys I know in the industry, I don't know if you guys know Alex Beddoes, but Alex also does the game dev discussion podcast for the Dynasty. And Alex is a big influence on me as well for podcasting and for art. And he recently got a job with Respawn in LA working on a new Star Wars title. And he is now fully remote. So he will work in England, but also work for Respawn in LA. So I think, yeah, it's going to be a thing where people have realized that you don't need to have one place for people to meet. If people have the technology and the infrastructure and the tools here in their own home, they don't need to be in the office. It's the same for my partner. Diane is working for local government, and they are also embracing the work from home scene because they've learned, because they're coders, they're engineers, programmers. They don't need to really be in the office. As long as they have the computers in front of them, they can work anywhere. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of like a new experience for you. Like before the pandemic, you didn't have like remote work experience,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
it was kind of funny
Yeah.
from my side. Like when I started working here at Garage
Mm-hmm.
Farm, we kind of like we had that style of working remotely for most of us,
Yep.
and that's when the pandemic hit. We were kind of like feeling lucky, we were just
Yeah.
prepared for that, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But do you see some cons? Like you mentioned that those live events that were canceled, like these face-to-face meetups,
Yep.
that were so important for you that you said you saved money for that.
Yeah.
How do you see that? Do you miss that a lot? Do you think it could be replaced, or is that something that can't really be fully replaced with all this virtual
I
connecting?
mean, yeah, there's a mix, right? So one of the things I've noticed from people even like playgrounds who host events, they've went kind of fully online. So did THU. Lightbox this year was fully online as well, and people done paintings over Zoom. And I think it's even a thing where Bobby Chu, who runs Lightbox, saw an opportunity there, and he invented Magna Studios, which is an online tool like Photoshop, which you can run in your browser. If you send people the link, you can all paint on the same canvas at the same time. So he already had the idea of making something that no matter where people are, they can jump into something and paint together. So they did a lot of talks this year where people were on Zoom calls and talking about issues, but they were all sitting painting on the same canvas, and they had these huge canvases with like 20, well, maybe 20, 30 people. There was maybe like 10, 12 people like painting on the same canvas. So there's a way that these can now exist digitally, but I think if the world starts to open up again, we will go back to in-person meeting. I think it's something that we crave as individuals. I know I do. Um, I know even like next year, I know that THU is prepping again in Portugal for their big event, and they had one this year. They had a THU in person in Portugal this year, and in Troya, and it seemed to go well. I didn't see many people getting sick. People were taking precautions and make sure they were vaccinated, and keeping socially distanced and trying to wear masks wherever possible, especially inside. So I think it's now opened different avenues for these events where you can have people going to things in person, but then there will also be an opportunity for people who can't go to things in person. They can also attain the digital pass and then, participate in that sense online. So yeah, but I need to get back to it because I need to get back to meeting people. I'm sick of being indoors. I mean, it's really getting to me now. So luckily we just bought a house recently, so I have my own space now where I can put my computer and I can shut the door at the end of the day and go downstairs and then go out for a walk. But previously, when we were saving for the house and the pandemic hit, we were in my parents' house, so my computer was in their spare room, which was their dining room. So, I didn't really get any sense of closure or privacy in that sense. But yeah, I'm just glad I'm here now. So yeah.
So, do you think like getting back to that idea of everything like going virtual, like
Hmm.
meetings, talks, and work right now, even
Hmm.
digital, and that matrix thing that is
Yeah.
happening, and the recent announcements from Facebook, like about the metaverse, and you know
Right.
just laying ahead of us, laying that vision of being totally shut down from the real life and just immersing in that virtual space.
Yeah.
uh, like, how do you see it? Is it that the future is bright, or maybe it's rather that we are entering some apocalypse? Or how would
Well,
you?
yeah, we talked about that kind of when we talked about the whole like the Matrix thing, and how things are going to live virtually. I think it's going to be a weird landscape in the next couple of years where people embrace living indoors more. The the positive is that we could be more connected than ever, right? We could be having virtual meetings with headsets on where people feel like they're physically sitting in front of us, and that gives you the sense of like connection because you can reach out and touch somebody, you can see them in front of you. It's less like you're staring at a screen. You know what I mean? But there's cons to it, right? We as people are not naturally meant to be sitting inside all the time. We're meant to be out in the sunshine. We need the vitamin D to thrive. Vitamin D isn't even a supplement. Vitamin D, un, unknown to most people, vitamin D is actually a growth hormone. So, like, if you're lacking in vitamin D in a lot of senses, there's parts of your body that just wither, and you really need to be outside at some point. So, I think over the last summer when we moved into the house, I was actively outside fixing stuff and putting stuff in my back garden because I knew if I got a job after summer or an opportunity and the winter hit, I was going to be, you know, that was going to be taken away from me. So I needed to really soak up as much as I could. It also means that, the VR experience is difficult because the glasses are one thing, but the Oculus headset is difficult because we know in younger children, Oculus headsets and VR headsets in general are not great for long term eye health. So it kind of makes me think that it could be dangerous at one point, like phones, because even phones have been such a new technology the last 20 years. We still don't really know the extent of what they're doing to us, especially with social media. So it's a thing where a lot of kids now are growing up with ADHD or things about attention because, they're so malnourished with it, with the dopamine, responses with social media. So that's a con for it as well as something you've really got to look at. I actually just really recently, I haven't ever talked about this publicly, but I developed a condition in my eye recently that I'm basically going to have my whole life. It won't affect my vision, and it's not anything too bad. But I think it was born out of my time on screens my whole life, and of course within the pandemic, being so fixated on the screen every single day. People don't know that when you stare at your screen, it actually stops you from blinking, so your eyes don't lubricate. So if you stare at your screens for too long, your eyes will severely dry and start to really develop horrible conditions because you're not either lubricating them or putting drops in or something like that, or using proper eyewear. So stuff like night modes are great now because they dull the screen into the orange, so it lets your brain rest. And yeah, I think I've had that problem my whole life with screens, but yeah, it's a double edged sword. Technology is great. It's furthering the advancement of humankind. It's going to be a great time for games and entertainment and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we have to limit it. We have to put restrictions on stuff. We have to really think about kids' interactions with technologies and how they're, using them. Um, so yeah, it's a thing where there needs to be, like everything in life, there needs to be balance, right? There needs to be real balance across the board and regulations.
Yeah, so as you said, you're kind of fed up with like this whole indoors. uh,
Hmm.
so what you would be that one thing that you did, that you would do if you knew that today the pandemic ended and there's nothing to worry about anymore? no restrictions, and what would that be? The thing that you miss most?
Oh God. Um, it's funny though when I say Comic Cons because I used to love going to them and being part of them and even having booths at them where I'd sell my own drawings. But like Comic Cons are one of those things, even before the pandemic, you would get sick at because there's so many people, right, in such a closed tight space. So having one of those during the pandemics has been like a like a nuclear, like do not go anywhere near. You couldn't have a Comic Con now, but now that the pandemic's on its way out, we're kind of thinking like we could start to hold them again. And in Scotland, especially, the guys at Gamer Hub are thinking about hosting events in Scotland that would be industry standard that people could come to as well. So there's a lot of opportunity for stuff, post pandemic. I think for me tomorrow, I definitely would want to try and go back to events or just meet up with artists around Scotland. And I'm planning on doing that. I want to start hosting, if I can, some in person events in either Glasgow or Edinburgh and meet up with people and try and just bring the community closer together because as funny enough as much talent as we have, you probably find the same in Poland, right? As much talent as there is locally here, trying to meet up with people is impossible because people have work or they can't get to stuff or it's a whole thing. But and then a lot of those people I know who want to meet up, it's like you only really meet up if you're just starting out or you're new to the industry because you're trying to meet people. But the guys who have full-time jobs or like working huge companies just don't have the time to do that stuff, so they never come. So I'd love to do, because we were talking to Carla Ortiz and Carla had this event called Fuck It and it was great because she was just like, people just show up and she was like, fuck it, just if you show up, you show up. And she was like, no matter how many people are invited, as long as somebody showed up, I was happy. If it was one person, if it was two, great. If it was 20, even better. And she really missed those during the pandemic because she couldn't host them. And now she's saying, like, post vaccination, she's hoping that we can start to roll those things out again and do them. So I'm planning to do a couple in Scotland just to get some kind of industry vibe or get people met up and doing stuff. I also want to at one point try and host my own event and have people come and do talks, and then obviously people would do in live demos or they would do talks about their career, maybe even do a live digital artcast and talk to people. So yeah, that's one of the things I would love to do is set up an event and try and get people to come from potentially all over the world or just all over the UK.
Yeah, but possibly the flip side of this, and the good side that people just have so much more time indoors is that
Mm.
the demand for the game dev and for generally CGI or anything
Mhm.
that's providing entertainment or at least
Mhm.
stuff like that. There's just so much more demand right now. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree if the pandemic just gave an unexpected additional boost to the already growing CGI industry.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, like on the film side of it, no, because of restrictions, people couldn't film stuff. So like that was holding people up. I mean, especially in Scotland, we felt the bite of it because Scotland, actually, believe it or not, is one of the highest places right now for people to film at. We just built a movie studio outside in Edinburgh where people are filming right now. But even the other week there, they were filming the new Flash movie in Glasgow. So they had the guy dressed up as Batman who was on the motorcycle and was chasing people. And there was a big accident there actually, and then one of the guys, the stunt guys, I think nearly died. But yeah, they filmed Indiana Jones 5 here. Like they had the whole of Glasgow set up like 1960s America. Yeah, and yeah, there's been tons of stuff that's been filmed here. It's crazy, and that was really hitting our tourism industry really hard. But then on the flip side with games, you know, my God, it's just like exploded, and there's just so much work now. I mean, stuff like Fortnite was just, they were printing money at one point, Epic, because just everybody was playing it. Apex, especially as well, like a bunch of games like that. Yeah, there's just so much need and demand for it now because people were indoors to play games. I mean, Twitch itself, like one of my close personal friends, like one of my older friends, like he started his Twitch career at the start of the pandemic because he was just so bored sitting inside. And then eventually it was like, you know what, fuck it, like, let's just jump on Twitch and start playing games. And a year later now, because he just recently celebrated his year anniversary, and he's like, I think he's just past 500 followers, and he's done that in 1 year, so it's pretty good. Um, I know he's on the road to Twitch partner now. So, but yeah, like there's so many people have born these new gaming careers just by the luck of the fact that the pandemic has started and people had to sit inside. So yeah, it's been a thing where the demand has just grown, and I think it's done great things for the industry. And now again, the positive, like I said about earlier, was that you've got guys like Alex who are working now out of England down south, but are working for companies in LA. He didn't have to go over to California. He's just working remotely for them. That gets to work on these major studio projects like Star Wars, um, without leaving the comfort of his home. So it's a win-win for a lot of guys like me. Also the fact that I work for an LA-based company and I get LA wages, but in the UK, right? So for me, that's a big benefit because if I had to work for a company here and get the same level, if I worked as a junior here, yeah, I wouldn't be making anywhere near as much money as I am with the guys in LA. So um, yeah, there's a lot of benefits that came out of the pandemic, and I'm glad for the fact that that's happened. So yeah, it's crap that the pandemic's hit and we're all in this situation, but at the same time, it's helped a lot of people I know. So yeah.
All right, I think that can be it, right? In terms of yeah. So let's talk about art. I'd
Mm-hmm.
say generally art, digital or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been scrolling through your Instagram feed, and I
Mm-hmm.
found one interesting fact that you are a big fan of Mike Mignola'sHellboy,
Yes.
which I'm a big fan of myself too, and
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy both the visual, very distinct visual style that he has, and
Yep.
also really enjoy the sense of humor. I really started out, quite late with the comics, like yeah, exactly. I started out from the first movie that
Mm-hmm.
that I saw, and then I just dug into the comic books.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah, but I
I
found
got to I got to meet Mike Mignola at Lightbox.
hmm,
He gave me a sketch and an autograph, so that was a moment for me.
yeah, these are
Yeah.
very inspiring moments. Like I wish I had that. I just myself had that little internet moments when I was thinking about quitting even having Instagram, and then
Mm-hmm.
I posted some stuff regarding one of my comic book heroes, like here from Poland, was called Tadeusz Baranowski. And then
Mm-hmm.
I just found that he's online on Instagram as well, and he liked some of my drawings, and that was like, that's
Oh wow.
that that's yeah, those moments that make you wanna stick to it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, what is that you like about Mike's work, his style in general?
Well, yeah, I mean, like that's a big question because I mean, Mike is like one of the all time greats, right? Like Mike's done so much stuff even before Hellboy. With his time at Marvel and another comic book adventures that he had before he made his own thing with Image. And yeah, like comics for me were a big part of my journey. Like one of the first art books apart from Skyrim that I got was Jim Lee's Icons, which was Jim Lee's art book at the time of all his drawings that he'd done for DC over the last, 20, 30 years that he'd been a comic artist. I think I love the draftsmanship of what they do. Like I just showed me in my sketchbook. I think those images are just even fun just to replicate or make. Storytelling is so prevalent in a lot of their drawings and anatomy, composition, perspective. There's so much that goes into that craftsmanship, and I think it's really an underappreciated art form. People pick up comic books in their local shops and read them for 10 minutes and throw them in the garbage, but it can take people sometimes months to make one of those issues. And, even between penciling, inking, colouring, lettering, there's so much that goes into just one of those issues and it kind of for me resonated with the idea of games because they're the same, right? Guys I know who work in stuff like Call of Duty, which is super popular at the moment, they will spend months, if not weeks, on a prop that will sit on a table that people will pass in 2 seconds, and it blows my mind that the appreciation for these things is so lost. And I think with the art form as well, with 2D drawing, it's something we really need to fight to maintain. And there's so many people I know who teach that stuff, who are very adamant about learning those things traditionally. Antonio Staparts is one of the guys who I interviewed, who does art workout of the day. And ArtWad is a great system where they teach different things every single day, every single week. Antonio puts up prompts and things for you to do, so you're constantly active. ArtWad actually stands out for art workout of the day. So every day you do something different, like 10 heads, 10 boxes. But his beginner course that he's just set up recently, which is great, is all to be done traditionally, because he wanted to basically, take a ground zero approach for every artist, that you don't need a Cintiq or a tablet, you just need a pencil and a pen and a sketchbook, or even just some paper. So I think for me, traditional art is great because it hones in on that natural creative spark that we have as kids, to draw on paper, to crayon, to make messes, and really keep the creative spirit alive, because the CG stuff's great and it's fantastic with stuff like Blender and Maya and all these great tools and programs, and Substance now with the whole thing with him merging with Adobe. Like, the possibilities are now becoming endless, and it's going to get to a point where studios, even now I've seen, have become program agnostic, where people who want to work in Blender and in industry can do it because they have now opened that door. So I think it's a thing where it's great to have that, and it's great that that is now a thing, especially now that even VR is a thing where we can sculpt and model in VR. But I still think those traditional tools play a huge role in relevance, in what we do as artists, because I know even loads of guys like you know who have these huge CG careers and have these huge 3D careers, but they started like just like me. They drew and they painted and done these traditional things because that was the earliest or most accessible approach to art for them, was art supplies, pencils, pens, papers, paints. Um, but then it's a great thing where, because of the way the industry is, you can transition those things really great. I mean, Matthias Sameka, who we've talked about at length and you guys have interviewed, he started as a 3D artist and then transitioned into 2D and is now obviously on the path to 2D animation, and his stuff. I don't know if you saw his Batman short recently, but
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, like all in Blender, all done by hand, and incredible, and it's great to see what a range that guy's had in his career. And yeah, I think as long as you keep those fundamentals, and 2D fundamentals are great as well for a lot of reasons. And like I talked about, perspective, composition, light, storytelling, those are things that when you go into a studio environment, even in 3D, people will look for that stuff in your work.
Mhm.
When you take renders, especially, and you set up a scene, you'll try and set it up specifically like a painting, where like your point of interest is on one part of the grid and your characters on the other, or the table's laid out so that things are kind of leading you round to one particular prop. That all comes into play. So I think for 3D artists specifically, 2D is a great medium to get into, just to learn a core fundamental that you can't get by opening Maya or Blender, right? There's only so much you can learn with those by clicking buttons, but if you physically have to paint or draw something in a perspective grid or a composition set, then that will inform so much to
Mm.
do with the rest of your artwork.
I'd say even that if you take a look at art in like art history in general, there was also always like kind of this push towards making like the art mimicking the real world that we perceive, and
Mm-hmm.
there was
Mm-hmm.
always like the kind of more stylized work or more
Mm-hmm.
transformative art forms
Yep.
that were
Mm-hmm.
more maybe diving into some specific mediums like sculpture or painting or
Mm-hmm.
different things that people did for making art. And art was always something more than just depicting the thing that you see. It was telling something more.
Mm-hmm.
And like digging into modern digital art, like for example, like I've been really blown by the Spider-Verse movie.
Mm.
uh, what they really did there, like bringing into the modern 3D animation and all those kind of like visual
Mm-hmm.
language of the comic book, of the
Yep.
print effects, like everything like layered together. It felt like a big big like meaty graffiti piece of
Yeah.
artwork, and all moving, and like for me it was like pure eye candy, and I enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
it even like that pure layer of
Yeah.
entertainment for me was very enjoyable to watch, and
Mm.
especially with that, that 3D dominance in the area, right? The
Yep.
VFX in movies, and that
Mm.
Pixar style of animation, like everything
Mm.
seemed all the same, and then that came, right?
Yeah.
So I
I mean,
think it.
especially with the new trailer that just dropped as well. Like the world they showed off in that new trailer for Spider-Verse 2, like
Mhm.
that looks even more comic-fied, like more
Yeah,
comic
yeah,
booky.
and I think that's kind of like a whole new world of exploration.
Yep.
That's
Yep. Yeah.
that's even more interesting than, I think it's even more interesting than this this Unreal Engine 5 metaverse thing. Like it's
Yeah.
this one seems you can kind of expect how it's going to turn out. Like in the end, it will
Hmm.
just be immersive, and it will fool your eye to
Hmm.
and make you believe in the world that it's just realistic. And the
Yeah.
other side of the spectrum is like really unexpected, and you can go anywhere from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would like to ask you, like we were talking about comics, and
Hmm.
w- did you have like some other role models or inspirations that were heavily influencing your art, aside from games and comics, maybe some movies, animations that were like big big milestones in your visual.
I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a loaded question because there's so much that's influenced me. I mean, games are one thing. Like, I mean, the world of games has always influenced me to be more creative and think about different mediums and worlds within worlds. I mean, I know for me, comic books was a huge thing for me. One of the biggest artists outside of guys like Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane, who are amazing, was also Joe Madoera, and Joe is now running Airship Syndicate, and they have obviously produced some Darksiders games recently, the Ruin King stuff for Riot Games. But Joe's influence was huge on me because he just his artistic style. It was just incredible. The stuff that he was drawing at the time. I mean, he's been working for Marvel since he was 17 years old. So like, that guy has some legacy. And Todd obviously with Spawn. Like Spawn's been a huge influence for me for a long, long time. The way he drew those comics, the animated series that I really initially got into before the comics, and then the toys. Like a lot of these guys were just self-made entrepreneurial geniuses. They had the forethought to really think about how the industry was changing. Even with McFarlane Toys, when Todd McFarlane made that branch of his company, he was talking about making super hyper detailed adult toys that were like, were going to blow the water out of anything else that like Mattel and Hasbro were making. And he went and done it and funded it all himself. And the comic book is still going. He's now working on a new Spawn film which is coming out, and the guy's just ahead of the curve. And to think back when he worked at Marvel, how he basically invented Venom and Carnage and those creatures that are now huge properties in movies as well later down the line. Yeah, those were some of the biggest influences. Just not even the idea that those guys were amazing artists, but just amazing people, just amazing entrepreneurs and business people and leaders. And yeah, so that was a big influence for me. And then I think in general, even though I've not agreed with some of their processes the last couple of years, but Nintendo was a huge influence on me for a long, long time. Just the way they used to create and craft their worlds, especially I'd say the last couple of years with Breath of the Wild, like that game really influenced like my stylistic approach to art making and prop making and world building and how things could be versus how they are. Um, so like yeah, I mean games also like The Witcher. We'll not talk about Cyberpunk, but like yeah, I mean The Witcher's obviously been great and a huge influence on me, and now with the TV series of that, it's been fantastic to watch. So that's inspired me as well. And yes, since the early days, it was again just playing video games and watching those behind the scenes. I mean, there's some great and incredible documentaries out there. I talked about Danny O'Dwyer, who we interviewed from NoClip, and he's made some really incredible. If you guys haven't checked out the NoClip channel, you really have to because there's so much content on there. He done a whole I think it was like a 4-part process on Square Enix and how they basically shut down Final Fantasy 14 online and relaunched it to what it is now, which is the behemoth that is Final Fantasy 14. But yeah, that whole couple of hours talking to those guys and his documentary on Astroneer, which was absolutely tear jerking and so heartwarming to watch about how They made that game despite of one of their colleagues dying halfway through production, and it's crazy. And then the Double Fine documentary, right? The guys Tim Schafer who made Grim Fandango and Monkey Island that's on my arm back in the day, and all that shit. When he started his own studio and made Psychonauts, and then made Broken Age and got it backed by Kickstarter, and they raised $3 million. Like that whole documentary, just every time an episode came out, just really inspired me and really got me motivated to learn and dive back into the industry and learn as much. And I've been lucky to interview a couple of those guys at that studio, like Scott Campbell and Lee Petty. So like, even Peter McDowell, who was their audio director on all those games back in the day. So I mean, yeah, there's a whole slew of things that influence me. It's not just one thing, and I think that's kind of the same for a lot of people. Music as well, like I mean, my time and entertainment, playing music and writing it, has been something of a creative outlet for me, and I still kind of write. I guess you could call it poetry, but I still write lyrics from time to time and try to get that out of my head and onto paper. So yeah, there's a whole thing. I mean, you talked about the Spider-Verse. I mean, I think the Spider-Verse almost lived through its soundtrack, right? That informative style of how the whole thing was positioned, how the artwork, the music was part of it. The music was such an integral part of that film, that it was almost like its own character, And I think that's where the mediums of filmmaking are now exploring unlimited potential, where they can involve music as a character, visual mediums as a character, paint, 2D, trying to meld all those things into one entity, for people to consume. Guardians of the Galaxy came back, with the new episode that's coming out soon, number 3. But when that first came out, the biggest thing about that film was the soundtrack, right? So there's a whole thing on entertainment mixing together and things all melding into one. And yeah, there's a whole slew of things that influence me. But yeah, it's hard to narrow just one. But yeah.
Yeah, so much things going on into that part of art, and
Mm-hmm.
yet it's all still kind of like with the digital art, especially that we are
Mm-hmm.
creating. It's all revolving around technology and all
Mm-hmm.
these new advancements, and there's so much work to do. Like it's like growing exponentially the amount of work that needs to be done there. But then the tools are also coming in, like the
Mm-hmm.
artificial intelligence. And I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you, what's your take on the AI in the
Mm-hmm.
artist's toolbox? And maybe
Mm-hmm.
do you fear that it will kind of, replace artists in general? Like there's a sentiment like that floating around.
I think that's one of the most asked questions we ever get as artists is about
Yeah. Is it going
AI,
to
and
take
it's
us
like, yeah.
our jobs?
I mean, like when Substance first came out, people used to say the thing like, "Oh my god, texture artists are dead. Like, there's going to be no jobs left." But then it was just another tool for texture artists to use and show off how much they could actually do because they had this new brand new technology. Even the fact that when the tools and pipelines came into stuff, like when people thought it was like the end of the industry when Unreal became free and you didn't have to pay for it anymore. Like, they're doing themselves out of money. They really should be still charging for it. But then think of how many people have got into Unreal Engine and learned how to use it because it was free. Blender especially, the exact same thing. People thought, is this the end of Maya? Is this the end of Max because Blender's free? No, people still use Max and Maya because they enjoy the program. So I think AI, like anything else, is going to be a tool, right? It's going to be something that when these tools come in, because it's still very early. I mean, you're talking like any adaptation rate is an average of 10 years. So now we're seeing AI to start becoming at the forefront of modeling and character design and all that kind of stuff. But then it's going to be like into the next decade before it's like we're using it the same way we're using Substance or we're using Maya, right? It needs to have an implementation, and there's no actually great use cases for it just yet. I mean, I know one of the AI tools, I forget the name of it, but I know the guy who actually made it, but the one where it would fill a room, you'd see like a 1980s kids room and the AI would make it, like that, and it would fill the room. But then even after that first pass, you still need an artist to come in and design it and make sure that it sits and works storytelling wise with for the scene that you're particularly trying to build, or it might be a really generic room, but like it might be a 1980 kids room and the kids like between the ages of 9 and 15 as female, is into goth music instead of pop punk, or so that's when the artist comes in and starts to add those little tweaks that make it, unique to the storytelling aspect of what you're trying to do. In terms of populating scenes, then yeah, sure. Like if you just want to fill a room with props and have a general just blanket to, use and then build on top of, sure, that's going to be a time saver. It's like the AI that Nvidia's building just now, where you can paint with certain materials like water or mountains or clouds, and then it generates a picture based on where your brushstrokes are. But then after the fact, that because Darek Zabrowski has done a lot of stuff with that, and Yama Yorev, where they've came in after the fact and spent hours on top of it. So it's like it's a great base, but then you have to take it to the finish line, right? You have to push it beyond the base level because it can't interpolate every single stroke. You don't know exactly where things are going to land or what it'll look like in the final image. It might change a lot. So AI is great. It's good that these tools are now coming into effect and we're going to be able to use them on a consumer level. But then it's trying to find out where they're going to sit in the game dev space, especially with the character generators that, Brass talked about this a couple of times about, the character, I think was it Unreal's character thing where they were generating characters for people and AI was making people basically, and the metahuman stuff, he was talking about like that use case scenario where those again are just like using base meshes, right? They're great for a start, but you try to get something particularly unique, you still have to spend 30, 50 hours modeling on top of that to make it what you need it to be in the game. People say like, if you're using a base mesh in ZBrush, for example, again, it's a pre-generated person that you could probably throw into a game, but it doesn't have the muscle structure you want. The face isn't aged well enough, or there's not enough wrinkles, or maybe it has a scar down his middle that you can't quite get, so you have to model that in. And so yeah, AI is great, but it's always just going to be a tool. It's the same with people who learn how to draw, right? And people are like, there's this AI tool, there's this thing in Blender like Grease Pencil, and it all starts with a base level of being able to draw, right? Anything beyond that is a extra, is a perk, is something you can use to speed up your process. The same with tools that come out for Blender that re-topologize stuff really quickly, or like hard drops at the moment, which is huge right now. But then people are like, oh shit, like I've made a hole, but now I still have to clean it up. Like, well, yeah, that's always going to be the case. I mean, when we get to maybe the point where like it also bevels or booleans, but then also cleans it as well, that's going to be a huge advancement because it's a time saver for us. But then, hard ops is still just a tool. You still need to be able to model to a competent level for that tool to really be utilized well. So yeah, AI will be a tool like anything else. It's not really going to change the landscape, I don't think, for a long time. And if it does, it'll just be something that you add to your tool belt down the line.
Mm-hmm. So if if all the AI and the things that are aiding us as artists, like all the digital tools, just went out, like the electricity went out, with a big blackout.
The solar storm's coming.
Yeah. So if that happened, what would be your art medium of choice?
Oh, drawing. It would definitely be drawing. I'd go back to just pen and pencil. Yeah, that would have to be the thing, because it was my first love. It'll be my last. I would love at one point to transition to doing full 2D stuff, but I've been lazy the last couple of months because as soon as I got my job, there was this huge sigh of relief where I felt like I could just take my foot off the brake for a while, because I have been stepped on the gas for the last 8 years. I've never stopped, going to events, networking, living online, speaking to people, the podcast, learning 3D, learning the mediums, learning different programs, learning Substance, learning Maya, learning Unreal. Like, it never ends, it never will. But then I felt like I was at a point now. I'd done a post on my Instagram and my Facebook way back when I first got my job, and I talked about, the fact that I got to sit downstairs in my new home, which we'd saved for forever to get and finally moved into. And I usually, almost always, when I lived in my parents' house, I took my breakfast or my food back to my desk and I would eat as I was watching a tutorial or I was trying to update something or render something. So like I was never away from my computer. But I made my breakfast that morning and I sat with my plate in my hands and I looked at my dining room table that we just got and I said to myself, I can just sit down here and eat my food and then go back to my desk. Like, I don't have to, I can relax for like 15 minutes. I've earned it, because at the time I had just finished work for the company, and I was waiting on feedback from them getting online. So I was taking some time to make some food. So yeah, I just felt like I could just take my foot off the brake and just chill. And I've been enjoying time with my partner. I've been enjoying my home. I've been enjoying just having a wee bit of time to myself at the weekends again. So, as much as art is a constant thing, I think it's also important to remember that it's just a job, right? It's just
Mhm.
something we do that we're passionate about, but at the same time, we have to learn to have the flip side, right? Like
Yeah.
the quiet time, the time with friends and family. I mean, you said you're married as well, so you want to spend time with your wife and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think if it all ended tomorrow, it would definitely be 2D. I'd go back to drawing and painting, but I might actually take a couple of months off and just not do anything.
Yeah, that's.
So
I think
yeah,
that's sometimes neglected. The part
yep,
that we're all constantly striving towards making better art, and at the end
hmm
of the day, you might just not have what to make this art about. You have to have a life,
hmm yeah,
because art is a communication tool, right? To express something and to tell stories
hmm
about something. And if you don't
hmm
have that something to tell about, right? Like
yeah,
what are you going to do art about, right? If you don't live your
yeah,
life.
yeah. If you don't go out and live life, then you can't replicate it in 3D. I mean, like even people who get who would dive into something like Speed Tree, right, and try and make something for a scene, and they'll make a tree and it looks cool, but then I'm like, there's trees out your back garden. Go stand out in your back and look at a tree and think how
Mm.
it's made, how it forms from the roots up and how it branches out. Like that's stuff that people really, really fail to see, with all this procedurally generated AI based technology is that you still have to go out and learn how the real world works before you can come in and replicate it in a computer. That's always going to be the ground zero stuff, like the stuff that's outside your door. Even the fact that people who, I mean, it's possible to be a good character sculptor without actually looking at people, real people. But most people I've spoke to would say you really should attend a life drawing class if you want to learn how to make 3D people, because breaking that 2D structure first will help inform so much of your 3D work. Even guys who I know who are animators for 3D games, a lot of guys I know who are animators go to acting classes and learn how to act and improv, because the body motion they create when they're acting is something they can replicate when they then have to do, mouth acting or hand gestures, or so there's always going to be a level of real life you need to have. Even when people replicate scenes in warehouses or derelict buildings, or like somebody would make a diorama of like a cafe or like a little shop. Spend the time going into places like that and taking a million pictures and see how things are set out. See how like the knives and forks fall on the table. Like it's for some tables that are a restaurant, maybe there's like a bit of residue of food or like some salt on the floor, or like if you have an animal in the place, there's maybe some bowls where the animal eats and lives, or a little cat house, or all those small details of real life will make your actual art 5 times better.
Yeah, I guess it's like with the AI thing. You
hmm
can have the best AI of the world, but if you don't feed it the right reference, right, it's
Yes,
not going to go anywhere. So we're kind of
100%. Yeah.
we're the natural intelligence,
Yeah.
and we also need that good food. Like I've watched a talk by some I think some art director. I don't recall the name, but his
hmm
thought was generally, in order to be a better artist, you need
hmm
to feed yourself the good reference, right? So in
Yes.
he made that into the quote, like, in order to make good shit, you gotta eat good food, right? Something like that, like
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
punchline.
I think that's also why guys like Alex Beddoes started to do photography outside of their art, right? Because that also is training your brain to look at scenes and compositions, but it's a different medium from 3D. So you can also then take that part of you and go outside and experience the real world, but still inform your artistic side and the 3D part of your brain, because you're looking at and research on how those places are made and formed, and how, you know, city street lamps sit, and how some things are crooked or there's things off balance. Like, that information is stuff that's just invaluable to people who build scenes in 3D. Because even when people first build scenes, the temptation is to make every single thing straight and aligned and perfectly angled. And even when you start to bevel stuff, you know, when you bevel things in 3D, you make things super sharp because you want it to look like, oh, that's a corner, that's a. But then you learn that a lot of your edges in 3D have to be soft because nothing in real life is that sharp, right? Or it would cut you every time you touched it. So it's like, you know, put your finger over the edge of your desk, see how sharp it actually is. You know, like hold a piece of your keyboard up or something, like, you know, try and think and feel how these surfaces actually interact with the real world. And that will make your 3D designs, 2D designs, anything more involved and more on the world of like attention to detail. You know, stuff that really, that's what people see as the bridge between the entertainment experience and the uncanny valley. You know, there's enough detail in there that it feels like it's a lived-in world, but no too off kilter that it feels weird. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Ooh, I guess there's so much, you know, so much we spoke about to chew
Yeah.
and think about. Right now, I'm just feeling full right now. So I guess this is a sign like that I need a break, and possibly our audience as well. But I guess if they turn hungry for more, there's always, you know, a new Digital Artcast episode coming,
Episode.
right?
Yep.
Someday
Yeah. No,
soon.
we've got the Christmas episode going up with Carl Ortiz, and then we have a big one planned for January after the new year that I'm hosting at the end of this week. I'll not give away any specifics, but it's going to be a huge episode with a massive industry veteran. So yeah, that's coming at the end of January. So yeah, keep posted for that one. And again, you can find me on social. You can find me on Instagram and ArtStation and all those other things. I'm usually quite active. So and I'll probably leave my email in as well if you guys want it. And if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to reach out and ask me anything.
We'll definitely also try to put all the links in the descriptions, and
yeah,
you won't have to search much, so you just click.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks again for having some time for us, and this was a really nice talk. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Dziękuję.
Okay. Yeah, it was our pleasure. So
yeah,
I guess we'll see you in the next episodes. Bye.
bye.